Welcome to the College of Complexes. Can you hear me all right? I don't know. We're having our 444th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. Is this working? All right. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is.
I'll be back.
We give an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter. We listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium to respond to the speaker said, for or against. Our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we put on our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements you want to make? Now's the time to
sound on?
Yeah, sound?
We can cut it. It doesn't sound like we hear you shouting, but I don't hear the sound.
It's not on.
No, it's the top two.
Testing 1, 2. What's this one right here? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, we're doing good.
Is that working back there?
Yes, it sounds better.
Anyway,
are there any announcements? Now's the time for announcements. Anybody has any announcements?
Okay, I got announcements.
Come on up here and make your announcement.
All right. Dallas Philosophers Forum is meeting on the 12th of February, and the talk is going to be on how does one approach documenting truth. So I think this guy's a researcher, so and one of his questions is how do you know something's the truth, I guess. So anyway, that's on. It's going to be at El Phoenix, which is off of Skillman and Adelia. Lecture starts at 7:30. People arrive at about 6 to eat. So nice chance for a relaxed evening of discussion and philosophy.
Which group was it? The philosophy?
Dallas Philosophers Forum.
On Tuesday?
On Tuesday.
The 12th.
The 12th. I don't know. We're on Meetup. Meetup.
Any other announcements? Now's the time. Any announcements? No announcements. All right, well, next week is on Building Heaven on Earth. It's Jake Bargasi, Senior Architect at IBM. He's going to be discussing it. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this, and but it's good.
Pronounced Bargees.
Bargis? Is that it? I got it wrong. Bargis. I'll try to remember that next week. I won't be here. Remember that next week.
Okay.
Bargis. All right.
Borghese.
I know a bunch of them when they say Bargees.
Well, I'll ask him how he wants to take it out.
East Indian name, not Italian.
Anyway, our speaker tonight is Dr. Stephen Butler. He's sitting right there. He's going to talk about secular humanism, the best alternative to religion. He's a historian, publisher, and an unabashed atheist, but he has called for the eradication of religion, privilege in society, the removal of religious influence in government, and the extinction by peaceful means of religion itself, which he has tended one of the greatest barriers to human progress ever devised. In answer to the inevitable question, with what shall we replace religion, he argues that the secular humanism, a philosophy of a way of life that is grounded in reality and supported by evidence, is not only the best possible alternative, but perhaps also humankind's best hope for the long-term survival on this planet. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Butler. Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, good evening. Before I begin, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here as the official or even the unofficial representative of any humanist organization. This means that apart from any material from which I might quote. The thoughts and opinions I express tonight are mine alone, although I don't doubt that they are shared by many of my fellow humanists, and perhaps even by some of you who are not humanists yet. I am also not here with the deliberate intent to insult or demean any member of this audience. But, as William Lloyd Garrison wrote in his abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831, I am aware that many object to the severity of my language. But is there not cause for severity? I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or to speak or to write with moderation. One more thing before I begin. There is no way in the little time that I have for this presentation to fully explain what humanism is all about. That's why I've prepared a suggested reading list, which is being handed out right now, of books that you can either buy or check out of your local library, which will give you a much more thorough explanation if you wish to explore this topic further. If all I accomplish tonight is to stimulate just one person's curiosity about the topic, I'll consider it a success. Now, in some of my previous presentations here at the College of Complexes, the last one of which, the most recent one of which before tonight was nearly 3 years ago, I have questioned the authenticity of the Bible, made what I think is or was a convincing case for the eradication of religious privilege in society, and advocated the removal of religious influence in government. I've also called for the eventual extinction by peaceful persuasion of the very concept of religion itself, which I believe, as Tom already mentioned, is not only an affront to the human intellect, but also, together with other outdated practices or notions such as slavery, the divine right of kings, and white supremacy, to be one of the greatest barriers to human progress ever devised. The trouble with this last item, that is, however, which is calling for the eradication or the elimination of religion from human life altogether, is because religion, in one form or another, has been around for so long, for so many centuries, that many people simply cannot imagine a world without it. Consequently, when confronted with that notion, the question often arises, but if religion goes away, with what will we replace it? In response to such a question, some, if not many, of my fellow humanists might reply, why do we need to replace it with anything? And truth be told, there was a time not very long ago when I would have answered it that way myself. But then as I pondered the question over time, sorry, I meant to say my fellow atheist, not humanist, in that particular sentence. There was a time not very long ago when I would have answered that way myself, but then as I pondered the question over time, I began to realize that in the light of history, the question's not unreasonable. After all, when the English did away with the divine right of kings in the glorious revolution of 1688-89, did they replace it with nothing? No. They replaced it with a concept of natural rights and rule by the consent of the governed, as advocated by political philosopher John Locke. When Americans overthrew the rule of hereditary monarchy altogether in the late 18th century, did they replace it with nothing? No. Taking the advice that Thomas Paine gave in his pamphlet, Common Sense, they instituted a republic. Similarly, in 1868, some 3 years after slavery was abolished in the United States, the 14th Amendment advocated by the so-called radicals in Congress, attempted to give real meaning to the former slaves' newfound freedom by pairing it with citizenship, although, unfortunately, nearly a century passed before the formerly enslaved and their descendants could fully enjoy its benefits. So in keeping with this line of thought, I find that I am now able to answer the question, with what shall we replace religion? And my answer, in a word, is humanism. Okay, so now before I tell you what humanism is, I'd like to tell you what it isn't. Because unfortunately, there are not a few people who have attempted to discredit it. Among these are Michael and Mary Findley, whose book, What is Secular Humanism?, published in 2014, takes that stand. In other words, they try to discredit it. Number one on the Findley's list of 15 fundamentals of secular humanism is the claim that it is a religion based on feelings and emotion, not reason. A statement that the authors support by quoting the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, a devout Roman Catholic who was perhaps the most unfit jurist to ever hold such a vaulted position. As it happens, the only way the Findley's assertion, that is, that humanism is a religion based on emotion, can possibly be true is if the term secular humanism is replaced with Christianity, or the name of just about any other faith. But it is certainly not true of secular humanism. For a start, when the word religion is used in the traditional sense of the word, which is almost certainly how most people use it, secular humanism is most definitely not a religion. Almost all the world's religions posit a belief in the supernatural. Humanism is quite the opposite. Nor can it be said with truth that humanism is based on feelings and emotion rather than reason. Again, it is the opposite. The Findleys also claim that the Bible, much of which was written by a nomadic, desert-dwelling people whose lack of basic knowledge regarding the natural world is truly astounding, is a book of science, and that secular humanism is a religion of mythology. In light of such assertions, the Findley's book is akin to Lewis Carroll's Alice Through the Looking Glass, in which a young girl visits an alternative world where everything, even logic, is reversed, just like the reflection in a mirror or looking glass. Carroll's book is also remindful of how some people justify their support for the current occupant of the White House. But that's a topic for another time. Now, in all fairness, it should be pointed out that some, but not very many, of the Findley's claims are true, such as secular humanists have no belief in a supreme being, or that secular humanists have no confidence in so-called intelligent design. But the authors are way off base when they declare that secular humanists seek to suppress opposition to their philosophy by any means necessary. Their claim that secular humanists see the ownership of personal property as evil is likewise false. Long story short, secular humanism is the very opposite of what its detractors make it out to be. So, if humanism is not a religion, then what is it? As it happens, humanism has many definitions, but most of them are similar. Here is the official definition of the American Humanist Society, the headquarters of which are in Washington, D.C. And I'm quoting, "Humanism is a progressive philosophy of life that without theism or other supernatural beliefs affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. Now, I think that's a good definition, but the one I like best is the one that comes from the Humanist magazine, which, although slightly longer, is a little more complete. And again, I quote, "Humanism is a rational philosophy, informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Affirming the dignity of each human being, it supports the maximization of individual liberty and opportunity, consonant with social and planetary responsibility. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of the open society, standing for human rights and social justice. Free of supernaturalism, it recognizes human beings as a part of nature and holds that values, be they religious, ethical, social, or political, have their source in human experience and culture. Humanism thus derives the goals of life from human need and interest rather than from theological or ideological abstractions, and asserts that humanity must take responsibility for its own destiny." Now, as you may recall, the title of my presentation tonight is Humanism, or Secular Humanism, the Best Alternative to Religion. For that reason, I think perhaps the best way to explain what humanism is all about is not simply to define it, but also to compare and contrast it with religion. That way, you'll be better able to see not only the differences between the two, but also much better equipped to understand how and why I think secular humanism is much better. Number one, so I have 5 items here that I want to expound upon. Number one, religion is childlike, humanism is for adults. The irony of using a quote I'm about to read aloud is not lost on me, as I'm sure it won't be lost on you, because it comes from a book from which you may think that someone like me is unfamiliar. You'd be wrong. It comes from the New Testament of the Bible, specifically 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. "When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." To my way of thinking, nothing explains the difference between religion and humanism more concisely than that Bible verse. Why? Because one of the principal things that humanists like me find troublesome with religion is that by promoting belief in supernatural things like gods, angels, devils, demons, and an afterlife, even though none of those can be proven to exist, either through scientific testing or by common observation and experience, it encourages people to suspend their critical thinking skills and revert to childlike acceptance of what they're told. I bet I'm not the only person in this room who as a child saw the similarities between God and Santa Claus. Both were old men with big white beards who somehow magically kept you under constant surveillance to make sure you were behaving yourself. And if you were, they would reward you with some sort of gift. And if you weren't, they would punish you. Santa by leaving a lump of coal in your stocking, and God by sending you to eternal torment in hell. The only difference between them that I could see is that God did not have reindeer in a sleigh, and his way of showing displeasure with your behavior was a lot more serious. In time, like most children, I realized Santa wasn't real. Some 20 or 30 years later, I came to the conclusion that God wasn't either. The only reason it took me longer to give up my belief in God was because all the people around me and in society in general seemed to think he was real, Thankfully, I eventually realized that just because a lot of people have a long-held belief in something doesn't make it true. As an atheist and a humanist, I know now that the only thing that makes something true is credible evidence. Now, in contrast to religion, humanism discourages the unquestioning acceptance of incredible beliefs. Instead, humanism encourages what I call an adult or grown-up way of thinking. In short, it is a way of looking at things that embraces reality, not fantasy or superstition or wishes. For humanists, there is only one world, the natural world, the one that all of us with unimpaired senses, no matter where we live on this amazing little planet, can either experience directly or learn about through the explorations and discoveries of scientific testing and inquiry. What this means in practice, then, is that unlike religion, humanism is grounded in reality, that is, the natural world, which can be validated by scientific experimentation and observation, rather than in faith that calls for unquestioning belief in supernatural, unprovable myths. Instead of appealing to emotion and wishful thinking, humanism calls for critical thinking, which means asking questions and evaluating the answers, not just accepting something as fact merely because some ancient text said so. Number 2, religions devalue human life. Humanism exalts it. Well, so what, you might say? If people wish to believe in God or an afterlife, then what harm is there in it? Certainly, if there was no harm, I could not in good conscience stand here and speak out against such beliefs. Unfortunately, there is harm, and sometimes a great deal of it, although at first glance it may not seem so. After all, don't most religions teach that human life is sacred? Of course. And why? Because life is supposedly a gift from God. Well, I have no argument with the treatment of human life as something special. That's something I think that everybody in this room can agree upon. However, saying that it is a gift from God denies reality. If you wish to thank someone for your existence, I suggest you thank your parents. And by positing the existence of an afterlife in which people are either rewarded for their faith and good works here on earth or punished for their infidelity and misdeeds, which is what most religions do, in effect, they devalue human life. What I mean is this. If you have belief in an afterlife, if you think that after you die, your personal existence is somehow going to go on forever in some idyllic heaven, then you may be more apt to stoically endure deplorable conditions in this life rather than try to improve them. Millions, if not billions, of human beings throughout history have accepted poverty, disease, and perpetual hunger as their lot in life, while kings and queens and capitalists lived it up in grand style because con men wearing holy garb, most people call them priests, assured the peasants that their reward would be in heaven. They also frightened those poor folks into submission by telling them that if they didn't believe in what they were taught, they would suffer eternal torment and hellfire and damnation. Unfortunately, this sort of rhetoric is still with us. Karl Marx may not have been right about a lot of things, but he was absolutely on target when he wrote, "Religion is the opium of the masses." As it happens, belief in an afterlife can also have deadly consequences. For example, when young people who have been taught to believe in it are induced to willingly risk their lives for a dubious cause, such as a war in which the enemy is supposedly stockpiling weapons of mass destruction. or to become suicide bombers. We should never forget that the 19 hijackers who crashed those 3 airplanes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on 9/11 were persuaded to end their lives, as well as those of some 3,000 other innocent, or 3,000 innocent people, by assurances that their actions would please their God, who would subsequently reward them in a blissful afterlife. Handwritten instructions that they left behind included these lines: you should pray, you should fast, you should ask God for guidance, you should ask God for help. The time of judgment has arrived. You will be entering paradise. You will be entering the happiest life, everlasting life. Now, because there is absolutely no credible evidence for an afterlife, humanists hold that this life is not just some elaborate dress rehearsal for the next one. Consequently, we need to make the most of the here and now, because this is the only life that any of us will ever get. This means that humanists actually place more value on human life than religious people. Instead of complacently accepting our lot in life because the next one is supposedly going to be better, humanists strive to make this life the best one possible. We also believe we should think twice before risking our lives for spurious causes. Furthermore, humanists believe that all of us need to do a better job of how we treat our fellow human beings in the here and now. Unfortunately, religious teachings can, and often do, lead to people either discriminating against or persecuting their fellow human beings, or unnecessarily involving them in aspects of others' lives that are, to put it quite frankly, none of their damn business. To the misnamed hypocritical pro-lifers who oppose abortion but support the death penalty in war, I say, be honest. Is it really going to hurt you if a woman you don't even know, who is either emotionally or financially unprepared for motherhood, or both, has an abortion? Or if 2 people of the same sex that love one another wish to live together as a couple, the way that heterosexual people do? Humanists believe that unless someone's actions have a negative impact on other persons, then what they do is none of anyone else's business. I would also say to the so-called pro-lifers, wouldn't it be better if instead of holding rallies outside abortion clinics and harassing the women and employees who enter them, wouldn't it be better if instead you channeled your energies into making sure that every person not only knows how to prevent unwanted pregnancies, but also has access to effective birth control, and that everyone has the financial ability to responsibly raise a child, so that no one would ever want or need to have an abortion? And wouldn't it be better if we stopped sticking our noses into what consenting adults do in the privacy of their own homes, and tried to be more accepting of human beings who can't help their sexual orientation any more than others can't help being left-handed? Not surprisingly, people may wonder, if there is no afterlife, then what happens when you die? The answer ought to be obvious. Do you remember what it was like before you were born? Of course not, because you simply did not exist. Apparently, since there is no credible evidence to the contrary, when you die, you will simply return to non-existence again. I know that for most of us, non-existence is not a pleasant thought, particularly if we are living happy and comfortable lives, or have hopes that our lives will improve in the future. In short, it is human nature to want to stick around. But, as the writer Mark Twain once said, and I may not be quoting him precisely here, Non-existence didn't do me any harm before I was born, and it's not likely to do me any harm after I die. So, like it or not, mortality is the truth, and that's definitely one thing that sets humanism apart from religion. And that is that humanism tells the truth about life and death instead of spreading lies and false hopes. That's another example of what I mean about thinking like an adult. Now be advised. I'm not saying that you have to like the notion of a limited existence, but the sooner we face that reality, the longer we'll have to take steps to make sure that our lives have meaning and purpose, and that the people we love and care about know it. Maybe, too, we won't hold grudges or put off spending time with our friends and family, and perhaps we'll do a better job of leaving this world in better shape than we found it, for the sake of ourselves and for our as yet unborn posterity. Ben Franklin once advised, don't waste time, because time is the stuff that life is made of. He was right. Number 3. Religions divide, humanism unites. Each of the world's major religions teaches its adherents that they are somehow special, that they have been chosen or singled out for special favor by God or some other deity, who has revealed to them the one true religion, and that everyone else in the world is mistaken. Interestingly, it never seems to occur to any of these chosen people, whether they be Jews, Presbyterians, Mormons, or whatever, to ask why God has not revealed this single true religion to all the people of earth, which, as the alleged creator of the entire universe, he, she, or it must surely be able to do. Consequently, religions create artificial distinctions between people that unfortunately encourage and advance an unhealthy, antisocial, and potentially hostile them versus us mentality. You would have to be living under a rock not to know that religious divisiveness was not only the root cause of much of the world's troubles in the past, such as the Crusades, the Inquisition, the 30 Years' War, to name but a few, but also the cause of much of the world's troubles today. Unfortunately, there is ample evidence of this. One of the most glaring examples is in the Middle East, where Muslims and Jews, the latter aided and abetted by evangelical Christians, who think it's where the second coming of Christ will occur, continue to quarrel over what is popularly termed the Holy Land, a desolate region, except where irrigation has redeemed it, which no one in his or her right mind would probably give a damn about if it was not reverenced by all three of the Abrahamic faiths. There is probably no other territory on the face of the earth that has been more fought over or for as long than this alleged Holy Land, which, apart from any improvements made by the Israeli people, really has nothing much going for it other than the fact that it is considered holy. At the very center of all this turmoil in the so-called Holy Land is the city of Jerusalem, to which Donald J. Trump, the most unfit person to ever hold the office of President of the United States, recently moved the U.S. Embassy, which had been previously located in Tel Aviv. Doing so not only ignored Jerusalem's long-recognized international status, but also gave de facto support to the disputed notion that this alleged holy city is the capital of Israel, and that the city therefore belongs exclusively to the Jews. Not surprisingly, this move has resulted in riots, demonstrations, and many unnecessary deaths and injuries. Ironically, apart from its From its long history and its so-called holy status, Jerusalem, like most of the region in which it lies, has nothing much going for it. Certainly it has no natural advantages. Unlike nearly all the world's other great cities, it has neither a large harbor nor a navigable river. Neither is it a financial or media hub. Instead, Jerusalem lies in the middle of a barren mountain plateau. Its population of a little over 800,000 inhabitants almost entirely dependent on a tourist industry that is itself completely dependent on the myths and superstitious beliefs of religion. Perhaps nothing in this so-called Holy Land provides a better example of religious divisiveness than the supposed tomb of Abraham, known as the Cave of the Patriarchs, which is located in the town of Hebron in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Over the centuries, the cave has been alternately controlled by Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Today, at the spot where the man who is revered by all three of these faiths is allegedly buried, a bulletproof wall divides the shrine into two parts, with separate entrances, keeping Muslims and Jews apart, because unfortunately, the two groups can no longer be trusted to mingle with each other. Why? Because in 1994, on the Jewish holy day of Purim, a Jewish settler named Baruch Goldstein marched into the purported holy shrine, where he opened fire with an assault rifle, killing 29 Muslim worshippers and wounding 125 more. When he ran out of ammunition, angry survivors beat him to death. Fortunately, although it was not always the case in the past, particularly in colonial times, here in the United States we are, with some exceptions, a religiously tolerant nation. But toleration is not the same thing as acceptance. Toleration simply means that you still think the other guy is wrong, but you respect his right to be wrong. Well, certainly toleration is a step in the right direction, but it is not enough. As long as we continue to look for reasons to set us apart from our fellow human beings, reasons that make us feel special and superior to everyone who is not a part of our particular group, then we are going to be a divided people, even if it's only in our minds. It also leaves the door open to some sort of adverse action based on those divisions. These actions can range from the mild, such as telling disparaging jokes about people who hold certain beliefs, to severe, such as defacing or destroying a place of worship, or physically attacking someone whose beliefs you find objectionable. But even when our divisions are not acted upon in a negative manner, they still leave us feeling divided, which is unhealthy. In addition to creating artificial barriers, religions impose equally artificial restrictions on people in ways that generally make no sense. For example, neither Jews nor Muslims will eat pork or shellfish. Why? Is there some health concern behind the ban? Let's look at the facts. Millions of people eat pork or shellfish every day, and I don't doubt that they enjoy it immensely. Some of you might have done that tonight. Neither do most of these people get sick. Why? Because it is perfectly safe to consume pork or shellfish provided it is thoroughly cooked, which is just about true of any animal protein. The fact is that even chicken, which Jews and Muslims seem to have no problem with, can make you sick if you don't cook it properly. So why is it that pork and shellfish are singled out by Jews and Muslims? The answer is simple. Because their holy text the Bible and the Quran forbid its consumption. Yet neither book provides any sort of reason for the prohibition, except that it is a rule supposedly handed down by God. Ritual fasting, which is practiced by Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and no doubt by members of several other faiths, is another baseless restriction. Frankly, it's hard for me to imagine that if there was an actual being that created the universe, he, she, or it would derive some sort of satisfaction from denying people their daily sustenance. Of course, these are just a few of the many restrictions imposed by religions. There is also an abundance of religious rules about how to store food, how to dress, how to wear one's hair, when it's okay to work and when it's not, and so on. And almost all these rules have no reason except that it is something that your God wants you to do to prove your love for him. With humanism, there are not only no gods or anything else that can't be established as fact by science or simple observation. There are also no competing doctrines, beliefs, or rituals to separate us from our fellow human beings, or to restrict our enjoyment of the only life we will ever have. Unlike religion, humanism is inclusive, open, and free of petty, arbitrary rules. To humanists, all the inhabitants of the earth are one people, united by their common humanity, and therefore entitled to respect and consideration, not shunning or mistreatment. Humanists hold that it is bad enough when people erect barriers that are based on physical features or characteristics that no one freely chooses, such as skin color, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and so on. When barriers are based on something that is quite obviously a human invention, like religion, when such barriers are not even grounded in any form of reality, they become all the more egregious. Instead of erecting barriers, humanists wish to do away with them. Instead of looking for differences, humanists look for commonalities, which are really not that hard to find. Humanists realize that all, or at least probably most of us that inhabit this little planet, like to find fulfillment in meaningful work, to be sustained by loving relationships, and to be able to provide a reasonably comfortable life for ourselves and our families. Surely, this is something we can achieve for all the people of the world. But only if we stop quarreling with one another over things that aren't even real, and stop wasting precious time and resources on them as well. Surely you have heard the old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. Well, that doesn't just apply to nations. It also applies to the entire human race. Number 4, religions impede progress, humanism advances it. Detractors like to accuse humanism of worshiping science. That is completely untrue. We do not worship science, certainly not in the way that religious people worship their god or gods. When was the last time you saw a humanist church? But we do respect science. Why? Because it is an undeniable fact that nearly everything that has been discovered or invented to advance the material well-being and knowledge of the human race since the beginning of time, and especially since the end of the Dark Ages, has been the result of science, not religion. Here's a question for you. Who developed penicillin? Does anybody know? Fleming, that's right. The answer, of course, is a scientist, Alexander Fleming, who by doing so has saved and continues to save millions, perhaps billions more actual lives than any number of non-existent souls that an evangelical preacher could ever hope to save in his lifetime. And who helped to harness the electricity that illuminates and powers our world today? Well, it sure as hell wasn't Billy Graham, nor was it the Pope, or anyone else remotely like him. The right answer, of course, is Nikola Tesla, an immigrant, by the way. It's equally true that no rabbi, guru, or imam had anything to do with the invention of the telephone, the airplane, the automobile, television, computers, satellites, or indoor plumbing, or any other device or procedure that makes our lives safer, more comfortable, and more enjoyable. Humanism gives credit where credit is due. It is a fact, not opinion, that science has given us everything we have today that makes our lives safer, more comfortable, more enjoyable, more fulfilling, and thus happier. And what has religion given us? False hopes and empty promises that can't stand up to scrutiny. My heroes are Copernicus, Galileo, Faraday, Pasteur, Lister, Darwin, Edison, Tesla, Burbank, Einstein, Hubble, and Sagan, to name but a few. All that the late Billy Graham or any modern day Pope ever did was the same thing any Christian minister does on any given Sunday morning. That is, read from an ancient, deeply flawed, and contradictory text that purports to be the Word of God while making promises of salvation and everlasting life that cannot possibly be proven to be true. The only difference is that thanks to technology, these holy charlatans, disguised in the cloak of respectability, have been able to do so on a much grander scale than in the past. To me, a single scientific laboratory is worth more than all the churches and other so-called holy places of worship combined. The latter are no more than monuments to man's credulity and ignorance. We need more scientists and fewer preachers, more research centers and fewer churches and divinity schools. Number 5, religions rely on holy texts for morality. Humanists believe that you don't need religion to be moral. Now, there seems to be a widespread belief among religious folks that without religion to keep us on the straight and narrow, all hell will break loose. And we won't be able to restrain ourselves from committing all sorts of heinous crimes against our fellow human beings. Get real. Are you really so depraved that it's only the fear of burning in eternal hellfire that keeps you from being a monster that goes around committing felonies with impunity? And aren't you forgetting that we have a lot of human-made laws with punishments to go with them that covers most of what we might call antisocial behavior? The fact of the matter is that if religion is really what we need to keep us all in line, it isn't doing a very good job of it. Ironically, 6 of the so-called Bible Belt states, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and yes, folks, Texas, where folks are supposedly the most serious about their religious beliefs. These are the states that also have the highest per capita incarceration rates. Now let me be clear. I'm not saying that religion causes crime, but it seems to me it sure isn't doing a very good job to prevent it either. I think the problem is that as a moral guide, the Bible is sorely lacking. For example, let's look at the 10 Commandments, which so many Christians would dearly love to enshrine on courthouse lawns, and in many cases have actually done so. For a start, the first 4 commandments have nothing at all to do with morality. The first one simply says that God will be upset if you put any other gods before him. Why? Because he is a jealous God. Which always leads me to wonder, if he is the only God there is, then who is there for him to be jealous of? The second commandment likewise has nothing whatever to do with morality. It simply says you shouldn't make any graven image because God won't like it. The third one says you should not take the Lord your God, the name of the Lord your God in vain, which I'm sure that many Christians and Jews do on a daily basis. But again, this has nothing to do with morality. The fourth commandment says you shouldn't do any work on the Sabbath. But which day is the Sabbath? Jews say it's Saturday. Christians say it's Sunday. Either way, it has nothing to do with morality. I think you can even argue that number 5, which says you should honor your father and your mother, is really not about morality. Seems to me it's more like a nice suggestion. And what if your mother is a drug addict and your father is a drug addict and a pimp? Do they really deserve to be honored? Personally, I think it depends upon whether or not they've earned the right to be respected. Okay. I'll concede that 6 through 10 definitely have something to do with morality. Committing murder, adultery, stealing, bearing false witness, and coveting your neighbor's possessions are certainly immoral activities. But what about slavery, or sex trafficking, or drug smuggling, or drinking so much that you become mean and beat your spouse and or kids, or take so many drugs or gamble away so much money that you can't take care of your family responsibly? Where are the biblical admonitions against these activities? Of course, the 10 Commandments are in the Old Testament, which begs the question, what did Jesus have to say about any of those things? The answer is nothing. You know what's interesting too? There aren't just 10 commandments. In fact, there are 613. But no one except the most Orthodox Jew keeps them, because Reformed Jews take a cafeteria approach to the Bible, picking and choosing which rules or commandments they want to believe. And Christians don't follow any of the other 603, like God's command not to eat pork or shellfish, for example, because they think those rules don't apply to them. But Jesus said, or supposedly said, in Matthew 5:17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. In contrast to religious folks who look to the Bible or some other flawed holy text for guidance, humanists essentially look to only 2 things. One is the golden rule, which is not, by the way, exclusive to Christianity. Plenty of other religions proclaim a similar doctrine, and furthermore, it is not one that requires belief in a supernatural supreme being to make it valid. The other thing to which humanists look when it comes to morality is what the European philosophers who first advanced it in the 17th and 18th centuries termed the social contract, which was originally a political philosophy that defined the rights and duties of rulers and the ruled. In the broadest sense of the concept, which I prefer to call social responsibility, it also defines the rights and duties that human beings have in their relationships with one another. Simply put, it means doing what people have actually been doing in organized societies for centuries. That is, respecting everyone's right to life, liberty, and property, and also, as Jefferson put it, the pursuit of happiness, by voluntary agreement for the mutual benefit of all. It also can mean, if necessary, sublimating one's own desires in favor of the common good. In short, it is an implied agreement that I won't harm you in any way if you won't harm me. and I will do things that benefit you if you will do things that benefit me. In short, it's the old story of I'll scratch your back and you scratch mine. That way we were both better off. To be sure that those who either can't or won't behave in a socially responsible manner, we have laws to prevent or to punish such behavior and such antisocial behavior. But what about all the good things that religions do, you may ask? There are plenty of religious folks that act the way you have described, that is, in a socially responsible manner. And what about all the charities and hospitals and other organizations and agencies operated by religious groups that provide care and assistance to the poor, the sick, the homeless, the hungry, and the abused by religion? Will the extinction of religion mean that we will have to shut them all down? The answer to that question is no, of course not. Why? Because, believe it or not, it is not necessary to be religious, to be compassionate, to have empathy for one's fellow human beings, and to want to help those who need help. The truth is that religious belief is not necessary for good people to be good, but it is necessary for good people to do bad. And imagine, too, if all that money that is annually spent on churches and other places of worship was spent on hospitals, research labs, and projects that alleviated or sought to alleviate hunger and poverty. My elderly father gives his church $20 every Sunday so that the church building can be maintained and the preacher can get a salary. Wouldn't that money be better spent by donating it to Meals on Wheels or UNICEF? The compassion and generosity of humanists does not stem from the hope that it will buy us a place in heaven or keep us out of hell, two places we don't even believe exist. Instead, we do good for the same reason that Abraham Lincoln reportedly gave for his own charitableness. And I'm quoting Lincoln here. When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. And that's my religion. In 1792, in his book, The Rights of Man, founding father and fierce Bible critic Thomas Paine said pretty much the same thing. My country is the world and my religion is to do good. So let me go ahead and wind up here. To summarize, humanists teach only what science confirms, namely that there is only one race, the human race, and that our commonalities are far more important than our differences. Humanists also believe, because there is no credible evidence otherwise, that each of us has only one life, and therefore we ought not only to guard it, but also to enjoy it to the fullest. Humanists likewise hold that we have only one home in the universe, at least for now and the foreseeable future, namely the planet Earth, which we had better start taking better care of if we hope to survive as a species. Contrary to what the current resident of the White House has unfortunately declared, human-caused climate change is no hoax. It is an observable, scientifically established fact, and we are already behind schedule in dealing with this, thanks at least in part, if not largely, to the time-wasting quarrels that we continue to have with one another over things that actually are a hoax and fake news, namely religious beliefs. In my view, it is time for humanity to grow up, to put away childish things and embrace reality. In short, to recognize religion for the impediment that it is and abandon it in favor of something better, namely humanism. Like it or not, there is no loving, all-powerful being watching over us, or judging us, or helping us. There is only us, humanity, dwelling here on what the late Carl Sagan called a pale blue dot, somewhere on the edge of the universe. Whether or not we survive as a species is our own responsibility, not God's. The sooner we realize it, the better. Thank you.
Right there. On by your plate. I hope that one works.
So long as that's good. They put the switch inside. Give it a tap.
John, could you pass that membrane over?
If you can't get it working, pass that me.
I'm a little dry. Thank you.
Tom, pass it to me if you can't get it working. Is it working? Is it working? There you go. Okay. Have you ever witnessed an accident?
An accident? What's our?
Well, have you ever been to like a football game?
Yes.
Okay. Would you expect someone to believe you if you told them about that football game?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. Because it's your eyewitness testimony of what you saw.
Not only that, but the thing was probably televised and recorded as well.
Okay. But so your testimony, you would consider your testimony valid as a witness to what happened,
Along with the thousands of other people who saw the same thing I saw.
Okay. Agreed.
Not just me.
Okay. So are you in agreement that witness testimony is taken as hard evidence in court?
It can be, but witness testimony is sometimes faulty.
Well, sometimes it is, but as a general rule, like if you were asked to testify about the football game that you saw or whatever game it was, you would expect to be believed, right?
I would hope so, yes.
Okay.
I think I know where you're going with this. But
Okay, so we have thousands upon thousands of people giving their eyewitness testimony to near-death experiences. I mean, thousands, probably millions, okay? And many of these have been severely documented. I mean, in great detail.
Oh, really?
Okay, yes, they have. There's an institute, there's IANDS, for something for near-death studies.
Institute for Advanced Near-Death Studies.
Or whatever it is. Okay, so anyway, they've got reams and reams of documentation, plus eyewitness testimony, plus there's thousands of these things on YouTube. Are you willing to say that all of that testimony is invalid or wrong?
If they said that they saw heaven or hell, yes. In actuality, maybe they thought they saw it in their minds.
Okay, so
when they were in a near-death
okay, so
state.
based on your belief that there is no heaven or hell, you're willing to completely dismiss all of this scientifically documented testimony of near-death experience.
Well, can I counter with a counter question?
Sure.
Carl Sagan posited this question. He says, why is it that when Christians have near-death experiences, they always see Jesus? Why don't they see the Hindu god Krishna? Why do only Hindus see Krishna? Why doesn't everybody see Jesus?
Do Hindus see Krishna?
Say again?
Do Hindus see Krishna?
I'm just going by a quote. He actually used a different Hindu deity. But what he was trying to make the point of is that what we expect to see is what we is a result of our cultural conditioning.
Okay,
so if you grow up in the United States, you're a Christian. You're not probably not.
Well, there's lots of other people in other countries that see the same thing, and they've never been Christians. And there's one other thing.
Can you prove that?
Yeah. Ian Stevenson, who worked at the University of Virginia for many, many years, documented over 2,000 cases of reincarnation. And he did this scientifically. He used scientific method in great detail and documented all of the, at least he's got over 2,000. And his associate Jim Tucker is doing the same thing now. And you can read as much scientific documentation, scientific documentation for this stuff as you want.
Okay, well, here's what I would like you to do, if you wouldn't mind. If you wouldn't mind writing down the name of some of these people that you mentioned, or the studies that you mentioned, and give them to me before I leave.
Just look up
so I can look them up myself.
Look up Ian Stevenson.
Let me tell you why I'm dubious. because a lot of these studies are funded by religious organizations or people with strong religious beliefs who want desperately to find some evidence that the afterlife is true. And so I think these studies are, shall we say, biased and skewed. But you know, I'll wait until I actually read them before I'll pass judgment. Go ahead, next question.
Yeah, you mentioned Tesla and Einstein. Were they not both religious people?
Actually, Einstein was not. No.
Well, Tesla actually spoke to the universe, I understand.
Well, Tesla was a very interesting individual, and he used to have a lot of different sorts of hallucinations. But no, Einstein was not religious. He said, "I don't believe in a personal God."
Were you aware that Nikola Tesla's parents, his father was in fact a Syrian Orthodox priest?
I think I heard that somewhere, perhaps. I'm not
So
sure.
he grew up in a religious setting?
Well, so did I.
Well, I grew up in
I was a Christian until I was 38 years old. I don't think that really makes any difference.
Yes, Stephen, I remember you talking about your epiphany when you were 38. What brought it about? Was it a long series of doubts, or was there some signal moment that caused it?
It was actually a slow process. And I've heard other people who feel the way I do, who've had the same slow process. It started with giving up going to church. Because frankly, as a youth, I found it incredibly boring. And also I thought that the people I was going to church with were awfully hypocritical. It seemed to me they were going there just for social reasons, not really to worship. I didn't give up belief. I just gave up organized religion. I just sort of went my own way. But I did a lot of reading. I read the Bible. I can't say I read every single word of it, cover to cover. I can't recite it, chapter and verse. That's why I keep a Bible app on my cell phone, believe it or not, so I can look things up when I get into discussions with people. But it was a slow, incremental process. And I think just one day I realized, I was doubtful. And then, I don't know, one day I just said, you know what? I just don't see any evidence for this. It seems to me that if everybody says God loves us, well, if he loves us so much, why does he send all these disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, disease, you name it? Why does he send lightning bolts down to hit churches and burn them up? That doesn't make sense. You think those structures would be spared. It just doesn't make any sense, and so I just finally said, that's it, I give it up. Thank you.
Here's another controversial remark I want to make. How do you account for the people in the south of this country to be so religious but so profoundly unchristian?
I wish I had an answer for that. And that's one of the things that also put me off Christianity in particular, is that so few Christians acted in a Christian manner. That they, and still, it's that case today. There's still a lot of people who do that who are not. I don't know. I really can't say. I don't know.
Oh, in Israel, most of the religious Jews live in Jerusalem, and the rest are atheists. And you know why? There's one word, starts with an H, the Holocaust.
And I can see why that would lead to that conclusion.
But they discriminate against each other. Yes, they do.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know about that. Well, if you know, they an old marriage.
You are familiar that the basis of science is in fact the scientific method, correct?
Yes.
Is it not true that a scientific theorem is falsified if one example can be found that that theory does not cover?
That is usually the case if it is a credible experiment.
What defines credible?
Well, if 99 scientists conduct an experiment and they all have the same result and one doesn't, I would say that the one who didn't probably didn't carry out the experiment correctly.
Okay, just as long as we're not saying that reality, truth, is established by consensus. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think it is. Let me ask you a question. What would happen if I let go of this?
I would predict it's going to be all over the floor.
That's right, because of something we call what?
Gravity.
No, it's called the theory of gravity.
The theory, that's right.
And scientific theory is not quite the same thing as guessing. It's to test. It is a common experience. We all, every one of us, everywhere in the whole world, there's nobody who's going to pick up a glass, let go of it, and it's not going to hit the floor.
Actually, there's a whole group of them that meet every year in Chicago. It's the magicians.
Well, you know that kind of magic is manipulation.
Do you think it falls because of gravity, or do you think it falls because of the theory?
Well, I think the theory of gravity is that if you drop something, it will fall to earth. That's the theory. And I haven't known anyone to ever be able to falsify that theory.
Is that why it falls, because of the theory or because gravity exists?
Well, because gravity, obviously gravity exists. Just because something's called a theory doesn't make it a guess. We talk about the theory of the germ theory of medicine. But we all believe, don't we, that bacteria and viruses cause disease? I certainly hope we don't think it's demons and witches that do it, which people used to.
Jesus, I'm not disputing that gravity exists. I'm just saying that it isn't the theory that makes it fall. The fact, theory just describes what happens.
Well, you're correct. You're correct. I'm not.
Describes what happens.
Yeah, you're right. There it is gravity, obviously.
But let me ask you another
It's
question.
not
Do
somebody's
you think
guess.
that when you die, you just cease to exist?
That's correct.
What if you're wrong?
Well, I think it's more likely that the people who believe they're going to go to heaven are wrong. But here's the good part. They'll never know it.
The reason I brought up Tesla, you said all religious people were childish. Am I quoting you correctly?
In terms of accepting religious belief, in terms of accepting something as fact or as the truth without any credible evidence to back it up.
Are you familiar with George Washington Carver?
Not personally, but I know who he is.
Were you aware
I've seen his
that,
grave, actually.
Were you aware that he was a very devout man, and that he talked to God all the time and got his invention?
Listen, I'm not gonna say that every scientist is an atheist. That's not true. Although today the percentage of scientists who are atheists is much larger than it was in the past. George Washington Carver was a scientist, that's true. But when he went into the church or got down on his knees to pray to God, he was suspending his intellect in that regard, as do all religious scientists.
So
it
that's-
never ceases to amaze me, the people who would call for, let me give you an example, if you don't mind. If I were to tell you that there were pink fairies living on the dark side of the moon, what would you demand of me before you would believe it? Wouldn't you demand evidence? Be honest. I'm not going to take my word for it.
Well, it would be politically incorrect for me to object to pink fairies.
I'm not trying to make any sort of analogy here, okay? That was just something. It could be purple. It could be leprechauns.
Well, purple
Or
are in the
unicorns.
same category.
Okay, let me say purple unicorns on the moon. Would you believe me just because I said so? Or I wrote it in a book and said, there are purple unicorns on the dark side of the moon. Believe it because I said so. Would you do it?
The Chinese are taking photos there right now.
You
Perhaps.
haven't answered my question. I know that the Chinese have taken pictures, and I don't think they saw any purple unicorns.
Okay, but that's your belief.
That's true. It may be true that that's my belief, but is my belief the truth? Is my belief a fact?
But
If I can't provide credible evidence.
But see, you're making that judgment based upon a cognitive process.
Exactly.
What
If we
believe
can see it,
reasons-
smell it, hear it, feel it, touch it, observe it somehow, maybe through scientific instrumentation, yeah.
As you've barreled along your path of evolving into a humanist sphere, I'm sure you've done a lot of, I'm assuming that you've done some looking into why do people even believe and practice, you know, sometimes very fundamentally, what's written in the Bible, and that in some instances when they claim to be, you know, they will make, they've got a ticket to get into this heaven and this God, yet they follow a text in the Bible that promotes hate of certain individuals, and i.e. homosexuality, you know, abomination, and you know, dark-skinned individuals are inferior to fair-skinned individuals. And of course, you'll know what's occurred over time with buying into those man-written beliefs anyhow. Maybe in his youth he came across a black homosexual and therefore decided to put it on papyrus back in the day. But regardless of that how can they, if you've looked into various things along those lines, even begin to justify such hatred based and refer to a Bible verse and not ask the question, well, if God, you know, has truly created us equal and loves us all, why would he pick out those two particular groups, you know, for all the other beautiful creations to turn on in life? Period. And it has stopped, obviously, to this very day.
Is that as a question?
I'm asking you first.
Yeah. So what you're asking me is why do people hold on to beliefs, those sorts of beliefs in particular? Well, I think you probably have to ask this.
Their belief in.
Yeah. I think you probably have to ask a psychologist, but I can tell you why I think most people are religious. Because they were brought up in it. Just like I was. When I was very young, I was indoctrinated. I was taken to church. I wasn't asked, do you want to join this church? It was more or less just assumed. I didn't know I had a choice. I went to a class with the preacher with a bunch of other kids, and we learned about all the Christian beliefs. And then on the appointed day, which was actually Easter Sunday, 1961, we got up in front of the congregation, we recited the Apostles' Creed and all that stuff, and we became officially members of the church. I was even baptized. But when you are indoctrinated as a child, when your brain is like a sponge and you absorb everything that you experience, and all the adults around you are telling you this is absolutely the truth, and you just don't question this, and they don't question it. It probably never occurs to you that you can question it. I'll tell you what, when I was going through the process I was talking about with John, where I eventually gave up my religion, I was fearful for a while. What if I decide to stop believing and God decides to do something bad to me? You know? But you know what? The day that I finally admitted to myself that, hey, I just don't think there is a God. I don't see any proof of it. You know what happened? I had a feeling. Has anybody ever been on a roller coaster? And you go up and you get this exhilarating feeling as you go around the curve. That's how I felt. I felt exhilarated. I felt free at last of all this stuff that had been crammed into my head when I was a kid. Against my will, nobody asked me. You know, here's something I often say too. Why is it we won't let people drive a car until they're 16, or vote until they're 18, or serve in the military, or sign contracts? Because we don't think they're capable of making adult decisions. And yet we take children and indoctrinate them into our particular faith, and then, in essence, force them, maybe rather mildly, but still, or coerce maybe be the better word, into accepting that religion before they're old enough to have critical thinking skills. And I think that, personally, I think that's a form of child abuse. To take a young child and fill his head full of stuff without him having the chance to make an informed adult choice like he would at 18. Whether or not he wants to join the military, or go to college, sign a contract, drive a car, pilot an airplane, whatever. And to me, that just makes absolutely no sense.
And getting back to, as an American, and, you know, some belief I'm assuming in a constitution of this country, and therein supposed separation of religion and state, what's your view of, I know you mentioned it somewhat in your talk about how it's entering into the political world, but what's your view of, you know, the in God we trust on the money, even though these are all 50s kind of introductions, and putting God in the pledge, as well as just recently the Vice President of the United States standing before some fundamentalist group in Dallas, I think it was the Baptist Convention or something.
Yeah, it was.
And indicating or declaring that America is a Christian state when he's supposed to stand by the Constitution of this United States, which says religion doesn't enter into government. Mm-hmm. What was your view?
You know, it's interesting. I gave a lecture or presentation on this very topic over in London about 3 years ago. I was visiting England, and I addressed the Southeast London Humanist group, and I was bringing them up to date on how here in the United States we don't really have complete separation of church and state. Certainly, there is no doubt we are not a Christian nation, not in the sense that our government is based on it. You know what always amazes me? People say, oh, our government was based on Christian principles. Really? What are they? You know, list them for me. And nobody seems to be able to do that. It's always something very vague. If you look at the Bible, there's no mention in the Bible of representative democracy, voting, or anything like that. It's all about kings, kingdoms, and kings. Somebody said, one religious person said, well, what about the part where it says God is our king, God is our judge, God is our lawgiver? And I said, yeah, sounds like a dictator to me. One person doing all the, three things, and not those things divided. So no, I don't. In fact, the Treaty of Tripoli, 1797, which was negotiated by the George Washington administration and ratified during John Adams' presidency. I think it's Article 11. Don't hold me to it. It was Article 11 of that treaty. The Treaty of Tripoli says very clearly the United States government is in no wise founded upon the Christian religion. And this was the founding generation of the country that made that statement.
There's no mention of God in the Constitution.
And there's not one single mention of God or Jesus or the Bible in the Constitution. The only mention of religion is that we can't have any religious test for the holding of federal office.
Or use buildings, most states say you can't use buildings to get into
That's true. But the thing of it is, we have a supposedly secular society, but we have dressed up our secular government with things like putting in God we trust on our money, which, like you say, didn't come about until the 1950s, at least on currency. It was in the 1860s on coins. In God we trust in the pledge, that was also in the 50s. It didn't have it on there originally. And there's a whole host of things. Having paid chaplains, I object to having some of my tax money pay for a chaplain to open Congress with a prayer. Are those people so incapable of legislating that they need divine guidance before they can pass a law? Well, some of us might say yes. I just realized, yeah, some people might say, yeah, they need some sort of guidance. But anyway, but my point is, I do object to all those things. I think because, and one thing too, I'll contrast our government with the government of Iraq. The Constitution of the government of Iraq, the one they wrote after we invaded and everything, that Constitution says specifically that all laws should be based on the Quran. It says that the government of Iraq has a duty to preserve holy places and shrines, things of that nature. I don't remember all the details. But if we were truly a Christian nation, surely our founding fathers would have said so. We are a Christian nation. All our laws are going to be based on the Bible, as they were in colonial Massachusetts at one time. But they didn't do that.
Were you aware of the billboards that was up about 4 or 5 months ago that Jeffers from the First Baptist Church had America as a Christian nation billboards all over, but many of us
I didn't see them, but I'm not surprised.
Well, some of us helped get them taken down along with the mayor.
Good for you. Good for you. That man down there in his big church downtown, multi-million-dollar church, which they pay no taxes on. Yeah. No, he's a hateful little man, and no, I can't lie to him at all. I'm not surprised he did something like that.
Not only is it not a Christian nation, the founders were refugees of religious nations that combined religious precepts and politics or government with the word. And so they came here. The Protestants were persecuted and left England. And so they came here and they wanted to have separation of church and state. That's your
Actually, that's not quite accurate. The Puritans were Protestants. They were members of the Church of England, the Protestant Church of England, started by Henry VIII, who came here, founded the colony of Massachusetts Bay, and they immediately set up a theocracy. You know what they did to Quakers? They hanged them. They tortured them. They imprisoned them, and then they kicked them out if they were still alive. So no, the model, the European model of conformity and close combination of church and state was in fact was what most of the colonies did. It was mostly in the middle colonies like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and especially Rhode Island, where religious liberty was a bit more advanced. But it was, I mean, in Virginia, for example, you had to be Church of England. You had to go to church. If you didn't go to church, you were fined. You were fined a pound of tobacco because they didn't have any card money in those days. So they fined if you stay away from church for a month, it was 30 pounds of tobacco. And Baptists were welcome, Quakers weren't welcome. If anybody brought a Quaker into the colony, they'd be imprisoned. They deport the Quakers. No, it was an extremely intolerant time. Yeah, we've only been real, and even when the United States was founded, we weren't a tolerant people. Look what happened to the Mormons. I'm not, saying the Mormons have the right idea about things, because I don't think they do. But they were terribly persecuted by people, and they went to the U.S. government. The governor of Missouri said, "We will exterminate them." Sounds like the Holocaust to me. We're going to exterminate these Mormons. We're going to drive. They did. They killed Mormons. They drove them out of Missouri, and that's why they're in Utah today. And they went to the president, they went to Martin Van Buren, and said, "Mr. President, please do something." Well, most people think the government is there to protect our rights. Correct? Well, guess what? Martin Van Buren did nothing. And so that's why the Mormons went to where they were, to get the hell away from all these other people who were trying to kill them.
Thank you. Okay, I think you've misrepresented the Lord God in Scripture here a little bit.
How's that?
If you will recall, I think in 2 Judges, when the people were demanding a king, and Samuel was lamenting, and God spoke to Samuel and said, "Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they have rejected me." And from that time forward, then, God gives them a king. And the warning at that time was, you're going to have this woe, and that woe, and that woe. I mean, your sons are going to be sent off to wars, your daughters, whatever. But isn't that correct?
I'm not familiar with that verse. I'd have to look it up.
Okay, well, it is there.
But that certainly sounds like a real loving God. I'm going to do all these terrible things to you.
No, that's what you got with kings. See, the system before that was a system of judges. The actual Mosaic law was judges.
That may be, may or may not be, but the thing is, there's still no examples of representative democracy in the Bible. There's no republics. There's no people.
Well, that brings up, would you consider Karl Marx a secular humanist?
In the fact, I think you could classify him that way, but we're talking about his beliefs regarding humanity, so I think we need to separate his political beliefs from that. He wanted what was best for people in general, and he did not believe in the supernatural. In that context, and that context alone, I would say he was. Now, let's not mix politics here with what I'm talking about.
How can you separate it?
Because they're two different things. Okay?
Would you care to comment on the evangelicals' affinity to Donald Trump?
Well, it astonishes me. But it astonished me when they all loved Ronald Reagan too. Jimmy Carter, devout Baptist. To me, Jimmy Carter is probably the only Christian I can think of off the top of my head who really, really lives what most people call a Christian life. Okay? In his words and his deeds. And yet the evangelicals rejected him. And instead went for Ronald Reagan, a twice divorced Hollywood movie star who hardly ever went to church. And by the same token, they elected Donald Trump, a man who claims the Bible is his favorite book, but can't recite a single verse from it, as their savior, too. No, I don't. Because I don't think like them, it's hard for me to explain why you would have to ask someone like that. Because to me, it's unfathomable. I'm just boggled. My mind just can't handle it. It just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Do you know the local atheist organization?
Well, there's several.
Are there?
Yeah. I'm not a member of any of them. I'm not an official member. I visited some groups here and there.
Yes, is there diversity of opinion among scientists? And is there a reference point or a manual that determines who's a scientist and who's not a scientist? And I'm assuming just like everything else, there's diversity of opinion among the scientists.
Well, you know, it's interesting you should ask that question. There is the National Academy of Sciences. I don't know if that may not be the right name for it, but there is a national organization, and many scientists subscribe to it. It's interesting that most of the scientists who work with material things rather than theoretical are more likely to be religious than those who, for example, Stephen Hawking. He's not an American, but he was an astrophysicist. He was an atheist. He said so many times. Carl Sagan was an atheist, although he used the word agnostic. I don't have the statistics at hand, but the largest percentage of scientists in this country who are recognized by their peers as scientists who belong to scientific organizations, the largest majority of them are non-believers.
But there are people who were scientists who had those credentials and absolutely, and I don't mean to be offensive, had maybe an open mind, and if there was, if they were convinced that there is a supreme being, and taking a look at the universe and how things synchronize and operate in harmony, that's just not something that actually happened. So there are people who were a part of that, who later became Christians, and there's a biblical definition of what a Christian is. Not everybody can just say that. But there were those who left the organization and began to proclaim what is Christianity. So there's diversity among scientists.
Oh, I'm not saying every scientist is an atheist. No, that wouldn't be true. There certainly are some who are believers. Yes.
Yeah. And among the same thing applies to reason. Is there an ultimate standard for what's reasonable and what's not? You know, just like Christians say that the Bible is the ultimate reference point to truth. Is there a set standard to determine you're reasonable? This is how you can tell whether you're reasonable.
Well, here's what most, well, maybe not most Christians, but a lot of Christians say, that the Bible is inerrant. It contains no mistakes, no contradictions. And yet, I could, if I had time, and I actually did this in another presentation a few years ago, pointed out that the Bible is full of contradictions and mistakes and errors. For example, the Bible says that bats are birds. And here's another one. Why are there two stories of creation? In one story, Adam and Eve are created simultaneously. In the next story, Adam is created first, and then God says, oh, you need a helpmate. So he puts Adam to sleep, takes a rib, and creates a woman. So, you know, which is the right story? There are 4 stories of Jesus in the Bible. They weren't written to be read together as a whole. They were written by separate authors at separate times, and they have multiple contradictions.
Right.
And so how do you account for all this? What it means is the Bible is not as authentic and as authoritative as people make it out to be. See, I've studied all this stuff. I can't say I've read every word of the Bible, as I said earlier. But I've read enough to realize that when I was in Sunday school, they sure left out a hell of a lot.
Have you ever read the Minnesota Crime Commission report on children, on humanity, what it says?
Well, I can't say I have. I can't say I've ever even heard of it.
Yeah, okay. It did a complete comprehensive study just on children, and what it came up with kind of contradicted the whole idea that we were born good and things like that. I'll read it. I'll read it a little later on.
given that you've looked at and studied various versions of the Bible and maybe communicated with Christians along your pathway here, the version that I was introduced to as a child was they have Adam and Eve. Doesn't matter whether they actually have it or not. But they went out from the Garden of Eden and they had 2 children, 2 sons.
Right, Cain and Abel. Yeah.
Okay. Cain did Abel in.
Right.
Okay. So to me, life should have stopped there, but apparently it didn't. And so, which begs the next logical question: how do we start to populate? From that point, did Cain sleep with mommy? And so we started, and then that sister and that brother slept. So it's like, we're from an incestuous beginning.
Well, that brings, if you don't mind my interjecting something here. Yeah, that's a question that I wondered about when I was a kid. I'm sure lots of kids have in Sunday school. Well, if there was Cain and Abel and one of them's dead, who did he marry? How did the human race get started? But the Bible does actually include some really shocking things. Like, for example, when Lot, leaves the Sodom and Gomorrah, and his wife gets turned into a pillar of salt, and he's taken refuge up in the hills somewhere with his 2 daughters. One of them says, hey, there's nobody for us to marry. How can we have children? Let's go into the cave, and while our father's asleep, we'll have sex with him. And they both did. It's incest. Abraham, the patriarch, his wife was his half-sister. Again, incest. The Bible is full of things that I think most of us would disapprove of. So as a moral guide, it is sorely lacking. And talk about, thou shalt not kill. God does a hell of a lot of it in the Bible.
Well, maybe it's because he says there's a genetic deficiency from the get-go.
I don't know.
From a mental comprehension perspective.
I don't know. Any other questions? I think this is the longest questions I've ever experienced.
We've had longer ones, but this is getting up there.
Just like the government shutdown, this is
okay.
You 35th day. No.
You made a few statements, something about absolutely in there. You were saying that they're basically saying that no one has experienced heaven or hell. These things cannot be proved. It's, I would put it to you that years ago I videotaped a young scientist. I was young at the time. In '71, he was doing some work with Stephen Hawking. And Stephen Hawking asked him, how are you getting these equations? And the guy finally divulged first time to anybody, he said, I'm getting this all in dreams. Stephen Hawking replied to him, that is how I get my best work. That makes us brothers.
Well, I've never heard that anecdote, and if it's true, it's an interesting anecdote, but I would say that from my own experience, many times I dream about things that are on my mind, the problems I might have in my life that need solving or something that I need to do, and I'll dream about it. And I don't know, sometimes the answer comes maybe in my dream or in my half sleep. Before I wake up, I might be thinking I'm going to do this, that, or the other. So I don't doubt that that's possible, but that doesn't prove the existence of God or an afterlife. That just proves that we have very active brains, even sometimes when we're sleeping.
Oh, on YouTube, I watch YouTube all the time. If you go to, I think, something like Miracles, it shows all kinds of miraculous things that happen, even beings that look with wings. And somebody can be walking across the street and a creature out of just who knows where they come from in less than a second, and they grab this person and save them from some horrible accident. And this is all over YouTube. And And also I was thinking of Lourdes. So many people have been healed that go to these miraculous places on earth. How would you explain that?
How about all the people have gone there and haven't been healed?
I don't know.
If this is miraculous, then everybody should be healed.
Well, we don't know who can be and who can't. Some people maybe aren't supposed to be healed because
What do you
they're
mean
supposed to
they're
go
not supposed to be
through.
healed?
They're supposed to learn something.
How do you know they're
Tradition.
supposed to do that?
I don't know. You know, I just read.
See, this is the sort of thing that I find a lot of people will presume to know what God is up to. Well, God wants us to learn a lesson, or God wants us to do that, or God said no. You know, when we pray for something.
But how do you know he doesn't?
Well, how do you know he does?
Yeah, I don't have to prove it.
And let me just tell you, if God does exist, he's doing a damn good job of keeping it a secret from a lot of us. Because it just seems to me that if every piece of evidence, well, first of all, there's actually no evidence for the existence of God. And then there are all these things that, like, you can't explain. Well, let me give you an example. People say, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Why did this church burn down? Why did somebody run into a church and shoot a bunch of people? Why did this really nice person who did lots of good things for people get killed in an automobile accident, not this crummy jerk over here who lives down my street? You know, why is that? And the answer to that is, well, you think about this. God is portrayed by religious people, if I'm not mistaken, because I used to be religious, remember. I was brought up a Christian. That God is all-powerful and he loves us. Okay? He can do anything. He can do anything. He is the creator of the universe. If you create the universe, you can do anything. So, when you think about all these things that happen that are bad, what it seems to suggest is either God isn't as powerful as we make him out to be, and he can't, in other words, he can't stop it because he doesn't have the power, so he's not what we think he is. Or he can, but he doesn't because he doesn't give a damn about us. Or there's a third possibility. God just doesn't exist. And there's nobody looking out for us one way or the other. Which I think is the easiest and best explanation.
Dr. Butler, how do you explain the conversion experience where someone who is a criminal or a lowlife goes through an experience of receiving Jesus Christ and becomes transformed?
Well, does this happen spontaneously? It can. Well, most of the conversions I've heard of are due to preachers or some other religious person going to this person, talking to them about Jesus, reading the Bible to them, and we're getting them all worked up emotionally. And then they do it. I've never heard of any spontaneous conversions.
Oh, boy.
All by yourself, without anybody putting the idea in your head.
They brought a question. They gave us some out.
Good. Sorry. Thank you.
Now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? Got 5 minutes. Respond to the speaker said for or against. 5 minutes.
There's a lot to cover in 5 minutes. One of them is that I'm a Methodist, and our religion doesn't say the Bible is inerrant, it says it's sufficient. And I believe that's true.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I said I'm a Methodist, and my doctrine says that the Bible is sufficient. Of course, it doesn't say that it's inerrant. I don't think very many people nowadays believe that. You know, my problem with secular humanism is what's the basis for good? You know, our basis as Christians is that this is what God wants us to do. There's no basis for good in secular humanism. You know, you might as well just
the standard's going to be do what you can get away with, whatever you want. You know, you can say, well, I feel it in my heart. Well, that's the premise of religion, is God wrote it in our hearts, and we feel it because of that. You know, we had a little talk about the theory of gravity as opposed to gravity. You know, whether Dr. Butler believes in God or not has nothing to do with whether or not God exists. Whether I believe in God or not has nothing to do with whether or not God exists. But there are billions of people in the world who believe He exists, and they've got some basis for it. Mainly, part of it is what they're taught, part of it is what they know in their heart. You know, Dr. Butler quoted Marx as saying, religion is the opiate of the masses. And he didn't say that. And we're driving religion out of the United States. And what's replacing it? It's not secular humanism, it's opium. We had 80,000 people die from opium overdoses last year. And many of them died directly because of overdoses of opium, because people have no faith, they have no hope. You know, you can say what you want about religion being bad, but I'll remind you of another thing, and that is that there's some noted atheists that really weren't all that good people. They might have been secular humanists, I don't know. There was Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh. And between them, they murdered something on the order of 100 million of their own citizens, mainly for the sin of disagreeing with what they had to say. You know, I can't say that that's much of an argument for not believing in God, because they didn't. They felt like they could do what they wanted to do once they had enough power to do it. People do that. You know, there are plenty of fallible people in the world that profess religion, and you know that the goal is to make them better, not to criticize them. You know, there are a lot of different religions in the world, and I liken that to the story about 4 blind men that encountered an elephant. You know, one of them ran into his leg, and he said, well, he's like a tree. Another one touched his ear, and he said he's like a big leaf. Another one got him by the trunk, said he's like a snake. And the last one grabbed him by the tail, and said he's like a vine. You know, God is bigger than we can understand. And it's not hard to believe, to understand that, you know, we don't all get the same idea of what he's like. But we talked about out-of-body experiences, you know, being dead and resuscitated and having these experiences. I know 2 people personally who had those experiences. One of them, my grandfather, another was a close friend. They had no axe to grind, no reason to lie. But, you know, that's what they reported, just like what you read about in the various accounts of it. And one of them, my friend told me that he came to with the fireman doing chest compressions on him. And he said, I grabbed him by the leg and said, don't be afraid to die. It's great. You know, he had had that. He said it was the most peaceful feeling he ever known. It's just warmth and acceptance. And, you know, people who believe in Jesus see something they believe. They see God and they call him Jesus. And if they're Hindu and they see God, they call him Vishnu. You know, I'm sure if they're Muslims and they see God, they call him Allah. But, you know, you're seeing the same thing. You know, he doesn't show up and say, I am so-and-so. You know, you just see this presence coming. Yeah, I am, yeah. So, you know, I don't see any big conflicts there. You know, if you believe in science, you know, and most of all of us do, but science is not infallible either. You know, the man-made global warming is one of the things that Dr. Butler cited. You know, 20 years ago, science says sea level will rise 2 feet by 2020. Well, it's risen a couple of inches.
Centimeters.
The temperature of the world will rise by 2 degrees by 2020. It's risen about 0.2 of a degree. You know, if they're wrong, does that invalidate their theory? You know, when my father was going to college, he was told that the atom was the smallest particle that existed. By the time I got there, we were talking about neutrons and protons and electrons as being the smallest particle. By the time I left, they were beginning to think, well, maybe we can bust it into smaller pieces. Now, you know, there's all kinds of pieces, and they're saying, well, the pi boson is the absolute smallest piece, God particle. Now, I don't know why scientists knows better, we call it a God particle, but that's the story. And, you know, we may find it can be broken smaller than that someday. Science is fallible just like anything else. But to me, you know, there's another interesting thing about reincarnation. Most of there are stories of people who had past lives who got regressed by hypnosis and that sort of thing, but nobody could ever connect what they said with historical fact. Recently, there was a boy. He started when he was about 2 years old, having nightmares about crashing into the ocean in a burning airplane. And eventually he recalled, and not under hypnosis, he just recalled it. He said that he was a fighter pilot in World War II, that he had been shot down over Okinawa, and his plane had burned and crashed in the ocean. And he flew from an aircraft carrier there. And he named the aircraft carrier. He told him what his name was. He told his parents the names of pilots that he had flown with. And they began to check that out. And sure enough, that existed. That aircraft carrier was out of Okinawa. One of the pilots, whose name was James, he said that's what his name was, had crashed into the ocean. So these other pilots had those names that he gave them. There's no way he could have known about that. And you know, you get glimpses into what eternal life might be like, but you know, nobody knows. But you know, if I can't prove that God exists, nobody can prove that He doesn't. You know, we're in that same quandary there. My 5 minutes is up. Well, I will say this: that you know, if Dr. Butler is right, when you're dead, you're dead. That's the best that he can hope for. There's a promise of something better.
I'd just like to talk about science and evidence. The true mark of a scientific approach is willingness to consider seriously contrary evidence. If you look at the contrary evidence honestly, and you consider it, and you actually evaluate it according to scientific principles, and then come up with a conclusion that supports your original thesis, then you've got some validity. The problem I have with people who reject the near-death experiences and anything supernatural is they absolutely refuse to seriously consider the evidence. And there is an abundance of evidence. You know, as to Christianity, if you look throughout the world where Christianity spread, that's where Western civilization sprang up. And Western civilization has given us incredible accomplishments. It's given us peace, it's given us, you know, all kinds of scientific accomplishments. When you go to Africa, which grew up, I don't know, whatever, I'm not sure what the governing philosophy, tribalism, I guess. You don't find great cities, you don't find great monuments, except in Egypt. You do find them there. But there was a strong Christian heritage throughout North Africa. But my fundamental point is that if you're going to call yourself scientific, you need to actually look at and seriously consider contrary evidence. Global warming is taken as absolute solid fact. If you look at petitionproject.org, you'll find 31,487 degree scientists, 9,000 of whom are PhDs, who disagree with global warming, and Edward Teller is one of them. So if you're going to talk about global warming, you really need to look at the contrary evidence and answer the questions on petitionproject.org, or you're not being scientific.
Well, I feel that insults have been thrown around a bit here, whether intentional or not, so I'm not going to refrain myself. Honestly, I look at the secular humanist belief as being something akin to an Appalachian holler that nobody ever got out of. And that is really because if you look at what you're doing there, you're using a form of reductionism where you are discounting huge amounts of human experience to arrive at the belief system. Really, this is what it is. Science is something that is never settled. Back in the 1930s, the mathematician Dirac came up with what he felt was a perfection of the Schrödinger wave equation. It postulated something that drove Heisenberg and Schrödinger crazy because it talked about an unseen, unmeasurable dimension that was just right there in the math. But it was a description of everything that weighs, basically. Heisenberg was so offended by this because he had a political agenda. He's trying to get rid of all this spiritualism and all of this religiosity and everything. He wanted to have a hard science. Only what we can measure, only what we can see with our 3D measuring devices. I would put it to you that we have actually a very limited spectrum in which we perceive and we measure even. I mentioned a young scientist in 1971 working on rockets with Stephen Hawking helping him. Later on, he wrote a book called America's Fall from Space. He'd done some work in various programs and did some time in the Office of Naval Intelligence. And he actually was talking about space to market transfer, and at one point he was talking about a very sensitive camera that could record just incredibly small differences in temperature. And this is something they were using in space applications to find out, for instance, if the space station had any leaks in it or something. They needed to be able to tell where they needed to put the duct tape. Believe it or not, they do use something like that. So somebody wanted to use that sophisticated camera to do some ghost busting, and they actually caught images of a ghostly figure through the differences in temperature, and were able to repeatedly photograph this paranormal activity at a particular haunted location. Now, there's not enough time for me to even begin. In a previous talk that you gave, Dr. Butler, I got up and gave some evidence. I was born into a secular humanist family. And that was, I was a young atheist, and that was my reality until I met Pochette Stewart when I was 15. Pochette had killed Nazis when she was 12 and 13, working with the Belgian resistance, living in the hedgerows and stealing chickens, and actually they used maggots to clean out their wounds from their encounters with Germans, and then they would fry maggots up for dinner. She talked about real rough living there when she was growing up. Well, I met her later on. She had been tested by J.D. Ryan Institute and had registered as significantly above random. All I know is when I met her through some friends, there were all kinds of paranormal things going on over at the residence at 517 Lahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. And that place, I mean, there are books flying off walls, and there are these apparitions, sound apparitions going down hallways and doing all this kind of stuff. And I'm trying to figure that all out, and we're having long philosophical discussions late into the night because she's a Rosicrucian and she's a Theosophist and she's this and she's that, and she hates Catholic priests. So anyway, I'm trying to take this all in, and so she gives me a little bit of training in some of these psychic arts. And I had a very significant out-of-body experience from French class, where I actually was able to create phenomena on the other end in front of witnesses. And that is the day my atheism died, because you can't have that reality when there's another dimension. When you've got things going on, I'm personally experiencing this and creating phenomena in front of witnesses. At that point, I guess you know, I'm in that category now. You know, you got to say that my experience must not be true, but that wasn't the only one. That prompted me to go ahead and travel. I left home at 16. At 17, I sold everything I had and traveled to India. In India at 18, I actually witnessed the materialization of food by a lady saint who had been born in 1896 in Bangladesh. And I consumed the food, and quite happy I was to have that food, because I hadn't eaten anything all day and it was already after dark there at the ashram. So I could go down a long list of paranormal things I've witnessed. At some point, I came to the conclusion that there's really nothing that Jesus' ministry, nothing that he did or happened there that I haven't seen some shadow of or some actual in India. There's no reason why I could not believe that Jesus Christ was absolutely who he said he was, who they said he was. As far as the four Gospels, I answered that that's kind of like 4 different witnesses to an accident scene. Why do they have to agree? They were all there, or you know, they're reporting from somebody who was there, more accurately. So, I mean, there's a lot of confusion in the early days. I would say what you rejected is you rejected a straw man. You rejected something that you've been imbued with, that you've been programmed with. That doesn't mean that there's not some reality separate from that is actually real. That would be someone we call Jesus Christ. Thank you.
My view is that people believe what they want to believe, and it's true in science. Actually, there's some huge disputes in science. I think it's that phenomenon. People have a firm belief that something must be true, and by George, they'll find some facts to back it up. But generally speaking, you know, science is. I have 3 degrees in science, so I have some authority to say something. I don't think any scientist believes absolute truth. What it is a body of knowledge that seems to work. So you take gravity, okay, well, Newton promulgated the theory of gravity, and Einstein came along a century later and said, yes, in a certain case, you're right, but in other cases, then your theory doesn't hold. And so whatever you're doing in science, you must recognize that you may not have all the facts. And when you're proven wrong, when there's a fact that doesn't fit. In fact, actually, what scientists are doing in CERN, for example, the accelerator in Switzerland and France on that border, is trying to find the anomaly, because that then gives them a clue to new information. And so then we come to the biggest hook of all, which is this life after death theory. And I remember years ago, people asked, well, do you believe in life after death? I said, well, of course it's obvious. There is obviously life after death. It's called children. And every species on the planet has some form of procreation when you pass on your genes to the later generations. And this is why we have this affinity, for children so much. And so, yes, I think, as we already, our bodies just wear out. And this is a way of continuing life. So to think that there's some kind of glorious existence of this one-hour body, to me is obviously wrong. It's the children and grandchildren that they grow. This is why we more social, responsible man should take much greater care of one another, and especially our children. And I'm afraid that very often religious people don't. And this is why I think religion is one thing, but I think the principles of Christianity really stem from the Far East. And it didn't originate, did it? He was indoctrinated from people from the Far East, and he went back to the Far East after he died. He didn't die on the cross, actually. There's historic evidence of that. Because the message from the Old Testament is so utterly different. So utterly different. They're not one and the same thing. So, so that's my view of things.
Well, first off, you talked about pork. Why shouldn't everybody just eat pork? Well, we know really that pork gave you trichinosis for one thing. I also read later in a Jewish cookbook that it actually makes the body age faster. So we don't want to do that, do we? But anyway, and of course it's hard to digest and all. I don't know if anybody's read about Swedenborg. My goodness, the man predicted the day he would die. He was a scholar, well known in his own time along the eastern seacoast. There are groups of people that study his work. It's just fantastic. He said that he spoke with angels. He predicted the fire in Paris before there were telephones. He predicted a lot of things because he was psychic. And fascinating reading, but it's kind of hard to read. There was a companion that walked with St. Paul. I can't think of her name. I actually just read about her last year. And all these fantastic things happened to her. She wanted to be with him after she heard him preach. And she did not ever want to marry. I think her name started with a C. But anyway, this man fell in love with her. She was so beautiful. And she embarrassed him in public, so he had her, he was going to have her burned. And they set fire to the wood or whatever they had around her. And she prayed, and there was rain came down and put out the fire, so she was saved. Then another instance, I think when they went to Rome, another man wanted to marry her. She must have been very beautiful. And they threw her in with the lions, in a lion's Colosseum-like situation. And the female lion protected her from all the male lions. It's a pretty fantastic story if you want to look it up. Also, J.B. Ryan, I heard him speak years ago in Dallas. And I was going to a doctor at the time who studied at Duke University and knew all about psychic phenomena. He said they tested him, and actually they accused him of cheating on tests because he was so psychic. He was really an interesting man, Dr. James DeMint. And I analyze handwriting. I'm a handwriting analyst, and his handwriting should have had all this psychic ability. He had a very rightward slant in his handwriting. What else have I written here? The autobiography of a yogi talks about all kinds of miracles that happened to Yogananda. He was very popular in the early century. If you read that book, it's just fantastic. All he would do is pray and ask for things, and they would happen. And I know many people that pray and ask for things, and their prayers are answered. So if you want to consider that just by chance, you can. But I've had many prayers answered myself.
Well, thank you for your observations. I think some of them kind of very succinct. We believe pretty much what we want to believe. And I don't think, I never considered the Bible as being science. It's faith. And as other individuals have stated, the religion and Christianity is really different. We confess one thing, we do something else. And you always said if God is God, why the bad thing happens? I think bad thing happens to us because we create it. We do it. God gives us a choice to sin and not sin. And we can do what we want to do. And I think a lot of the things that happen is we bring it on ourselves. And the global warming thing, I think we do a lot of things to destroy the ecosystem. And we get the resilience of that is what happened. I would try to convince you to be a Christian. And no matter how much you talk about atheists, you're not going to convince me to be an atheist. I believe what I believe, and I've had some experience that kind of solidifies under the Bible. You have all different types of versions of the Bible, so that's why we have different things and said by different people, because people are interpreting it the way they want to interpret it. And so that's why you have those differences. I was brought up in the Baptist church. Went to Sunday school in the country. When you go to church, you couldn't see your friends in summer. So it was, I went to church more or less to see my friends than I did to do for church. But I had a choice to go or not go. I wasn't forced to. I kind of forced my daughter to go to church. My wife and I, when my son got old, I could go to Sunday school and church after one. And he missed both, and he decided to go to Sunday school and not church. So I think, I never considered Christianity to be a science. We believe, it's our faith. And I think the Bible is a pretty good book because it deals with everything, good, bad, and indifference. And I think it's a good book. I think Christian principles are good if we practice.
The Bible describes the human heart as being sinful, deceitful, and desperately wicked. I think the Lord Jesus gets blamed for a whole lot of things that man created himself. Scripture teaches that when we're alienated from God, we're alienated from one another. So he gets blamed for a lot of things that we do. He didn't make us robots. He's given us free will. It's interesting, back in 1926, the Minnesota Crime Commission did a study on human nature. Commission that I don't know exactly how long it takes, but it's often been quoted. It describes what children are like, which all of us have been there at one point or the other, which is in complete harmony with Scripture. It says, every baby starts life as a little savage. He's completely selfish and self-centered. He wants what he wants, when he wants it. His father, his mother's attention, his playmate's toys, his uncle's watch, or whatever. Deny him these, and he sees with rage and aggressiveness, which would be murderous, were he not so helpless. He is dirty, has no morals, no knowledge, no developed skills. This means that all children, not just certain children, but all children are born delinquents. If permitted to continue in their self-centeredness, world of infancy, given free rein of their impulsive actions to satisfy everyone, every child will grow up a criminal, a thief, a killer, and a rapist. All of this took place this simply highlights what Scripture says about human nature, that this is it. We're self-centered. That's basically why the world is in the mess that it's in. Now, as to the Bible is not a secular book to begin with, to be read and understood by somebody who's not been born again. If you're not a Christian in the biblical definition of the word, that admitting that you're a sinner, God himself came, and this is not a Greco-Roman myth, and paid the price for your sin in the person of the Lord Jesus. You trust him as Savior. Then you cannot understand Scripture. It's not intended to be understood by somebody who's not born again, because it's not a secular book. He explains the best-selling book of all time for the past 2,000 years. It was the famous atheist Voltaire who predicted before he died that a few years after his death, the Bible would be wiped from existence, and the only Bibles you'd be able to find are those within the museum. A few years after he died, the very house he owned was purchased by Butler Bible Society to print new Bibles. It has been the best-selling book of all times for the past 2,000 years. You cannot explain how it is. There are no contradictions in Scripture. It is historically and scientifically accurate. That's a different subject all of its own. If you're trying to understand the mind of God with just human reasoning, which is pretty arrogant to begin with, and you're taking it out of its context, it won't make sense to you. Again, it's not intended to be understood by somebody who's not born again, who's not a Christian in the biblical sense of the word. Every one of us each of us has our own contradictions, our own hypocrisies, inconsistencies, and it comes out of that nature that we have, that virus of sin. Read Dr. Carl Menninger's classic work, Whatever Became of Sin. But he has a plan to redeem the word. But I wanted to throw it out there about the Bible and trying to understand it. I hear this a lot among atheists and unbelievers. It doesn't contradict, one complements and completes the other. 66 books that read in marvelous harmony. The Gospels, they're not contradictory. The writers of the Gospel were just writing from a different aspect of the Lord Jesus. John focused on his deity, and Matthew his kingship, Mark and Luke his humanity, because he was the God-man. They're not contradicting. They're just focusing on different aspects of it. No one completely understands everything about it because it's the mind of God. Timothy tells us how we got it. The writers of the Bible wrote, but the third person of the Godhead gave them to write, supervised their writing. That's how we got that. So it's not intended for somebody to understand if you haven't been. I know this may rub many the wrong way, but this is what Christians and evangelicals say. Has there been some serious contradictions down through the years, centuries, by people who claim to be Christian, who committed some atrocities, things like that? Sure. No representative of each company, countries that go to embassies are complete epitome, represent that country's values. This contradiction about all of us, just on a much smaller scale. And it's part of that vein of sin and humanity. But I don't claim to be a cerebral genius, but there's so much design and intentionality in the world to think that this all just happened. The design and intentionality implies a designer in all of this. You know, if you study it, as vast as it is, how things seem to function in harmony, things like that. How do you explain all the meteorites that's flying through the universe that have seemed to go? Of course, in the past there have been some to hit the earth, but all of the stuff that's flying out there that seem to miss the earth all the time, and also with our own makeup and being. You know, exactly what are we composed of? What's our nature? Is there a material and an immaterial part of us? So what causes death? What happens at death? Do we have a soul and spirit, and what happens to that? You mean to tell me that just disappears? I don't believe any atheist or agnostic who's died believe that now. I don't think so. And no one genuinely believes it. Again, you cannot understand Scripture if you've never been born again. If you don't know what that is, it makes no sense to you until you have. There have been plenty of people who are agnostic and atheists, but who had integrity. I don't mean this to be a personal insult, but who went on an honest search for the truth, came back proclaiming the very thing that they once completely designed. What was his name? Carl. He wrote the screw tape letters. C.S. Lewis was one of them, probably one of the brightest and one of the most intelligent individuals around. He sounded just like that. He did his best, dedicated his life to shredding scripture, the claims of Christ, the Lord Jesus. We have historical writings of historians who were around at that time. Okay, who were around at that time. First century historian Josephus, there was Pliny, there was Tacitus. All of them wrote about him. Nobody has been able to explain what happened to his body, come up with a logical explanation as to what happened to his body. But you and I are more than just physical molecular structure, soul and spirit, and rest assured, that continues on once we die. All right.
Well, Mr. Beasley is here again. When I was in India in 1972, one of the individuals that I met was the secretary to the Shankaracharya Puri, which is a religious order. And he spoke of Jesus' travels there in India during the missing years as a youth, as it was documented in the Temple of Jagannath Puri and in a Buddhist monastery in the north. He never said anything about Jesus dying on the cross and being there afterward. There's so much innovation going on. People put out books and get money for lectures and so forth. The name Jesus is actually quite common. So I don't doubt that there may have been a Jesus in India after the crucifixion. I wouldn't doubt that was actually him, though. Because we do have a history where some of the apostles were and events that went on there. It's one.
There is evidence.
Well, I mean, look, I'm just saying I've actually been in India. I've been in the Jesus Cave, which I think is abroad there in northern India. I've been there, so I'm just saying I didn't find any evidence of him being there, but apparently some German lady says she did. Well, sorry. I think some of the same evidence of his missing years, people are applying, saying after the crucifixion. I had a great friend for some years back in the 80s who was a Moscow University theoretical physicist. And one time from sundown to sunrise the next morning, he filled about 5 blackboards full of equations. And ended up with a statement that I always get wrong. But he said, the preponderance of left-handed chirality of photons in living matter precludes any conclusion of randomness. And then he said that's the nearest that a theoretical physicist will ever get to declaring the presence of God. So that's your intelligent design by a physicist. And Butler, the yogi was mentioned. The lady I visited in northern India, who materialized the Buddha in Kankal Ashram in Haridwar, was chapter 43 or 45 from Autobiography of a Yogi. She was the only living one of the stories that Buddha had told in it, and that's why I sought her out.
I guess I'm the last one standing, last. Anyway, I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here. That's all, thank you. The greatest believer in the world will die thinking he's going to heaven, but maybe, just maybe, he'll only be 6 feet under, and that's it. The greatest non-believer in the world will die thinking he's going to be 6 feet under, and that's it. But maybe, just maybe, there's something to all this. Every society in this world, Polynesia, all other places where organized religion never reached, people came to think there was some type of God because they couldn't accept, they couldn't begin to think that it was just going to be over. They had to have some reason for going on. They couldn't live with it. So this is it. We're here in this world today. We got to do what we can to make it better. That's how I kind of look at it. That's where I look at it. My mother used to say, like people in Mexico, where they were barefoot and pregnant, because they well, it's God's will, They let things go in that respect. And we have human will. We can do things. We can change things. We can make things better. And we ought to move in that direction. We have machines replace people. They don't pay taxes. This has been going on since the Industrial Revolution. And today we're working, in this country, we're working ourselves to death. We don't have time for our kids. We're not raising people like we should. And we're burning up our time. We really need a shorter workday in this country, put more people to work. And this would make things better. But then, of course, our corporations will leave town and go overseas where labor costs are even cheaper and leave us without jobs. So we need to put, there was an antitrust law we put in years ago, and that's the type of legislation we need to do today, to put tariffs on corporations when they leave town and go overseas and try to sell things back here. Then we will have jobs here, and we can shorten the workday, and the corporation won't leave town. These are the things we have to do. This would make life better. This would stop a lot of the wars and revolutions and all the things that are going on, because why disparity between the haves and the have-nots is a very dangerous thing, and that's what we're leading to, and we need to do something about it. Anyway, I better shut up and get this back to our speaker.
Okay, well, this is the 6th or 7th, maybe the 8th time I'm speaking to this august body, although it's been nearly 3 years since my most recent visit. And I'll say what is coming to my mind every time. I sometimes wonder if my audience really listened to what I said. And there's no way at all I can address, what how many people really, like 8 or 9? The other 9, I think, or 10 people. Said an awful lot of things. Somebody mentioned about the pork. I just thought I'd bring it up real quick. I told you I have a Bible app on my phone. And it doesn't say a word about trichinosis or causing premature aging. It says in the swine, because it divideth the hoof, yet cheweth not the cud, it is unclean unto you. You shall not eat of their flesh or touch their dead carcass. These ye shall eat of all that are in the waters. All that have fins and scales shall you eat. And whatsoever hath not fins and scales you may not eat. It is unclean unto you. No explanation, except it's unclean. What does that mean? I don't know, because people eat shellfish and pork all the time and it doesn't kill them. Anyway, no mention of trichinosis. There's just so many things that you guys brought up that I just don't have time to get to. One of the things is the first speaker said something about, well, humanism doesn't have any moral basis, so we can do just whatever we want to. I covered that in the 5th part of this presentation tonight. I said, yes, there is a basis for it. It's called mutual benefit. It's called social responsibility, social contract. We all do things for each other, and we all respect each other's rights and property and life because it makes the world better for all of us. So I did cover that. What else? Hitler was not an atheist. You guys can get that right out of your heads. Hitler said in Mein Kampf, when he talking about getting rid of the Jews, he said quite specifically, I am, by doing what I'm doing about the Jew, I am doing the Lord's work. He was raised a Roman Catholic. He never recanted his Catholicism. I'm not saying he was every Sunday church goer, but German soldiers went into battle, Nazis, under the Nazi regime, with belt buckles that had Gott mit uns on the buckle. You know what that means? God is with us. Okay? Is that the mark of an atheist regime? I don't think so. Okay. Now another thing. Golly, look at this. I wrote all over that. I'll never get to everything that you guys asked me about or make comments about. Let me see. Oh, here's the problem I have with these near-death experiences. I tell you what, I will believe in an afterlife. If someone is declared dead, it's obvious to any observer that person is absolutely dead. They stop breathing, their heart isn't working, their brain isn't working. If they come back to life in 3 days and say they went to heaven or hell or wherever, I'll believe it. But when somebody's resuscitated and they never quite get to complete death, then I'm sorry, I think it's just stuff going on in their brain, which is what most, I think, reasonable people would assume. What else? Somebody said you can't prove God doesn't exist. Sure I can. If you can't prove he does exist, it's the lack of evidence that proves he doesn't. As I said earlier, if I say there are purple unicorns on the dark side of the moon, you're going to want me to prove that before you believe it. Well, I can't prove it. Okay? I cannot prove it. There's no way I can prove it. So I could say to you, well, prove to me there aren't. Right? What do you want to say then? Well, you're the one who's saying they are. The burden of proof is on you. Well, I'm saying the same thing to you. The burden of proof is on you. Prove God exists. But if he comes down out of the sky and declares himself, then I'll believe him. I'm willing, I am open-minded, I'm willing to do that. Another person mentioned, this gentleman right here, whose name I forgot, I'm sorry, that he was raised as a secular humanist or an atheist. You know, it's been my experience from things I've read and heard that there are quite a few people who say, oh, I was raised an atheist, but then I became a Christian. It's interesting how when you do it the other way around, it usually sticks. I think because atheists who are raised in a religious environment, like me, who do their homework, who read the Bible, who read books that are about Christianity. You should see my bookshelf. I've got several Bibles. I've got several books. I've got the Torah. I've got the Quran. I've got several other books about religion. I've got C.S. Lewis. I've got Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel's a good example. He was raised in atheist. You know what Lee Strobel is? The Case for Christ, the Case for God, something I forget. Anyway, he's written a bunch of, he's an evangelical Christian minister. Anyway, he was raised an atheist. But I think that's the difference. If you were brought up without any belief in God, you're more apt to adhere to it later on. But if you're raised in a religion, and then you start doing your homework, and you start reading the Bible and looking at it with a critical eye, you're going to go, aha, this is some stuff they didn't tell me in Sunday school. I didn't know about this. How come you didn't tell me that? And then you start reading books that are critical of the Bible, not just the ones that say it's all true. And you start to see a pattern emerge. And it makes it pretty clear to me that, I'm sorry, folks, you can have all the faith and believe all you want to. You have that right. I don't want to take that right away from you. Believe me, I did not. But I think you're fooling yourselves. I really do. By the way, the Bible has not been a bestseller for 2,000 years for the simple reason it hasn't been around that long. The books of the Bible were written individually over time by authors we don't even know who they were. Yeah, they got names on them, but that doesn't mean those people wrote them. Jesus' followers, the 12 disciples, were all illiterate, almost certainly illiterate, Aramaic-speaking fishermen and other occupations. The Bible, the New Testament, was written in Greek, not Aramaic, not Hebrew. And it was written many years, all different books about it. There was no such thing as a Bible. The Bible was actually a collection of books, which were put together, okay, by agreement in the 4th century. So it's only been around since the 4th century. So that's not 2,000 years. And then there's the fact that all Bibles were handwritten until the 1500s. So people couldn't buy Bibles, except rich people who had them handmade, okay? Or churches had them made. So there's only been printed Bibles since the late 1400s. So we're talking maybe 500 years. And why is it a bestseller? Because people think they should have it. They think they should get it. They think they should carry it to church with them. But I'll tell you what, I've met a lot of people who hardly ever read it, like Donald Trump. They have trouble reciting verses from it, or they only know what the Sunday school teacher told them. What else? Golly, there's just so many things on here, I don't know where to begin. And here's another question. If God loves us so much and thinks we're all sinners and wants to save us, why didn't, if He's the creator of the universe, why didn't He make us all perfect to begin with? Right? Why not? And this world is not that perfect a place, by the way. You might think it is, but it isn't. I covered this in an earlier presentation. Take the Earth, for example. Most of it is covered by water. Can we live in water? No. Fish can. We can't. And then you look at the Earth's surface, the part we can survive on. But can we survive on all of it? No. A lot of it's frozen wasteland, deserts. You look at, we've got some Australians here. Where do most of the people in Australia live? Along the southeast coast. Why don't they live in the interior?
Because it's like Texas.
It's an uninhabitable desert, isn't it? That's why you only got a population of what, 25 million, I think?
Yeah, we have the population of New York State inside the same landmass
as the United States. And why does Canada have 1/10 of the population of the United States? That is the second largest country in the world, because most of it's frozen tundra. Well, what about the Sahara? Who can live there? Not many people. So if you know nomadic goat herders live out there, or camel herders, or whatever. The fact of the matter is that the habitable part of this planet is very small. If everything was so perfect, then why is there disease? Why are these microbes able to kill us, or potentially kill us? Why did God do that? And if God gave us free will, why are there so many people going around, well, God told me to do this, and God told me to do that. God wants me to do this, and God wants me to do that. George Bush said God wanted him to invade Iraq, even though there weren't any Iraqis in those airplanes that hit the Twin Towers. But people do that all the time. If they want to do something, they bring out God and say, God wants me to do it, and you don't dare question God. That's what kings used to do. Don't question the king because God put him on the throne. Well, they did away with that in England back in 1688. Anyway, science. Science is definitely self-correcting. That's true. Scientists will be the first to admit if they made a mistake. Scientists do make mistakes. And that's the great thing about the scientific community. They have peer review. They try each other's experiments. They test things, and if somebody's wrong, they tell them they're wrong. And if we need to correct something that we thought was true, or we predicted, then we correct it. And then I'll tell you what, I'll just say one more thing, and I'll, because it's 1:15, and I'm going to get tired. global warming or climate change, I believe in it thoroughly, and not just because scientists, credible scientists, say it. The U.S. government report recently came out, which our president has basically poo-pooed, that said this is definitely the result of human activity, all this increase in the temperature, and all these storms and different things that we're having. I'll tell you why I believe in it. Back in the 1970s, I lived in London, England. I lived there for 5 years. During that entire time, I complained constantly about the weather, about how cold and damp and cloudy and rainy it was. It seemed like even in the summer. I remember in August, one August, we had to put the heat on. In August, did you put the heat on here in August? I don't think so, but I did there, and I used to be so upset about the weather. When is it going to get better? Did anybody ever see that Robin Hood movie with Morgan Freeman and Kevin Costner? I love the line where Morgan Freeman, he's from Africa, and he goes to England with Kevin Costner to become Robin Hood, and he looks up at the sky. He's never been to England before. He looks at the cloudy sky and he says, "Is there no sun in this accursed land?" That's how I felt. Okay, that's the way it was. And you can check out the weather reports if you don't believe me. But then in 2005, after 22 years after I left England to come back here, I went back to England to go to my son's wedding. He got married in London. And in March, not June, not July, not August, I went home with a sunburn. In London, I went to London a few years ago. I went to a park that's noted for its nice green lawns. It was the color of this folder, the grass. Don't tell me that global warming isn't real. It damn well is, and we need to do something about it. And as Forrest Gump always says, that's all I have to say about that.
That's it for tonight. Our formal meeting's over, and the speaker's still here. We're going to talk to him, and they kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know. And see you